Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 175. We are in the closing days of the month of Av, and going into the Shabbos, Parsha Re'eh, Mevarchim Chodesh Elul. This coming Shabbos will be the Shabbos that blesses the month of Elul. Elul is the last month of the year, and as Chassidus brings and explains that Elul is both the last month of the year, it's called the Chodesh HaCheshbon, where we make an accounting of everything we did in the past year, and a Chodesh HaChoneh, a month that also prepares us for the new year. And all this grows out of the month of Av. The interesting thing, as the Rebbe explains, Shabbos Mevarchim is like an interface, because Shabbos Mevarchim, Shabbos that blesses the next month, is always in the month before. So in a sense, Av is like the bridge between the month of Av and to the month of Elul. As I cited last week and previous weeks, the month of Av is the month of Mazel of Aryeh, Aryeh the lion, Leo, which is an acronym for Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Hoshaina Rabbah, Aleph, Reish, Yud, Hey. So from Av, from the Mazel of Aryeh, which on one hand could be a negative thing, referring to the Nebuchadnezzar and referring to the Beis Hamikdash, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, it also leads us, Almanas, as the Yalkut Shmeini says, that Aryeh will be rebuilt, the Beis Hamikdash will be built, and the Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi in the month of Aryeh, and that gives birth to the month of Elul, which in turn sums up the entire year and prepares us for the next year. So let me share a few words in understanding this, the Chassidus Applied of this period in time. Elul, as I said, is a dual month in the sense that it's the conclusion of and the preparation to. And it's usually in the week Parsha Re'eh when we bless the month of Elul in the Parsha of this Parsha. So there's a question that's asked, the Rebbe asked the question, Re'eh nechi nesem lefnechem hayem es habracha, and then says ve'es, the opposite. Behold, see, behold, I present to you today, nechi nesem lefnechem hayem, I present to you today the blessing and the opposite of blessing. Now when you say the word nesen, which is to give, kol ha-nesen ba'ayin yofer nesen. Nesen refers to the word matana. When you give something, giving and parting is considered to be a gift. It's like gifting. So the question is this: it's one thing to say, here I gift you the path of blessing, but how could you say that the path of the opposite of blessing is also part of the nation? I give you, behold, I give you before, I present to you before you, I give you as a gift the path of blessing and the path of opposite. Where's there a gift in the opposite of blessing? And the Rebbe in a beautiful way explains that in the journey of life, there are two blessings. There are two ways that a blessing can be manifest. When you're traveling and you don't know which direction to take, you come to a crossroad. So one direction you know is going to bring you blessing, and the other direction is going to bring the opposite of blessing. So the blessing is to know both of those facts. So if someone says to you, here's the path that you will travel down this path, you'll be blessed. Or someone else tells you, if you travel down this path, you will not be blessed. Knowing that is the gift. So the gift is not the opposite of blessing. The gift is knowing, not just knowing what path to take, but also what path not to take. And often in life, especially in our personal, emotional, and growth, it's most important not only to know where to go, but also where not to go. To avoid the mistakes, to avoid the pitfalls, to avoid the challenges that can waste a lot of time to get back on track. So the Re'eh nechi nesem lefnechem hayem is telling you that there's the path of light, there's the path of darkness. Take the path of light, obviously. B'charta b'chaim, choose the path of light. But knowing what is not for you is just as much blessing, maybe even more so, than knowing what is for you. Which, of course, in applying that to our lives, is a tremendous lesson. Because, as I said, sometimes you could know what's right for you, but sometimes someone with experience, someone that's been there, someone has gone through more challenges in life says to you, I've been there, don't take that path. And that's equally important. At a psychological level, the same is true as we grow and we develop ourselves in our faculties, in growing in fulfilling the purpose of our lives. Every day we make choices. Do I do this? Do I not do that? So it's equally important to know what not to do as it is what to do. which brings us back to the month of Elul, because that's what Elul is about. Elul is the month of a cheshbon. It's an accounting. It's taking stock, which is a critical thing in anything in life. You see in business, even in personal life, even in business, you see the need to take stock. You need to evaluate in order to grow. To just say, hey, we did well, and let's just do better, is too vague. You need to evaluate, and you need to be able to, in detail, break down what is it that you accomplished, what were the things that could have been done better, what are the things that you should avoid. So the Eya Nechin Nesam Lefnechem is really the path, what paths to take and what paths to avoid, which is in general the accountability and the transparency of our lives, is having that integrity where we don't just continue to go with the flow, but we pause. We pause with a certain humility, with a certain trepidation even, but not trepidation in a negative way, a certain respect and humility in face of our great mission in life. So we're now at this period of time when we make this transition and we begin that journey. And I specifically use the word journey because we're walking the footsteps of Moshe Rabbeinu's journey. Because at the end of the day, what is this period in time? This period in time reflects Moshe's journey. The journey began after the Eden left Egypt, so 50 days later they received the Torah. 40 days later Moshe returns with the luchos and sees, unfortunately, the building of the golden calf. 40 days he goes back and beseeches God to forgive, and it's not successful. And Chodesh El, these are the days, the last days of the middle 40 days. Chodesh El is when Moshe returns. So when we walk through the steps of Elul, we're actually walking Moshe's footsteps. The footsteps of asking and beseeching God to help us repair that which we did wrong, with a firm resolution to improve and grow. And the revelation of the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, the 13 attributes of divine compassion, which gives the power to the month of Elul, as the famous mashal, the Alter Rebbe, explaining, if it's such a revelation brings a Yom Tov. That's why Yom Tov are not just nice days chosen. It's because there's a more divine revelation on those days. If Elul is the divine revelation of the 13 attributes, Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, which was revealed to Moshe as he was begging God to forgive the people, then why isn't Elul full of a holiday? So he says because it's like Melech Besada. Elul is a deep transmission, but it's in our mundane lives. As we work in the fields, that's where the king, before he returns to the city, the famous analogy brought in the Likutei Torah, Parsha 8, and this week's Parsha, the Chassidus Parsha, is that the Melech, before he goes back to the palace, which is where it's difficult to access him, and you have to it's a formal invitation, a formal entry, and so on. Here, even as we're dressed in the garments of the field, which is the Melech is traveling, his travel garments, that's when we can approach him, and he shows everyone a smiling face and responds to their needs. So to speak, the king is in the field with us. And therefore, Elul is Taki Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, but Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim in Yemei Achel, in the mundane. So Elul is that powerful month which we're about to enter. As I said, we're now in that transition stage, the interface from Av to Elul. Okay. In our personal lives, this is also true that our divine experiences, our transcendent experience, aren't just experiences during a holiday or Shabbos, but also in the mundane weekdays. In our regular basic lives, we can find the deepest treasures. And Elul captures that idea. Tishrei is already relating to the God and to the divine experiences as they are in the full glory of the Giluyim and revelations of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, and then the end of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres, Shana Rabbah, Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah, and all the days in between have their special powers. But Elul is that place where, again, the material meets the spiritual. In the physical world, in our activities, in our regular activities, we elevate it, and that's where the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim shine and radiate. Obviously, there'll be even a higher level of that in Yom Kippur, but Elul begins that radiating and illumination of that, of the compassion that will lead to Salachti Kidvarecha, Hashem saying to Moshe, yes, you prevailed, and I forgive them, which of course happens on Yom Kippur. One of the ways that we can do this effectively is one of the reasons I wrote the book, 60 Days. It was actually written in response to, I saw people who really did not find answers and did not find the inspiration they were looking for in the high holidays for whatever reason. So I decided to dig a little deeper and actually make a workbook that goes through the 60 days, beginning from the journey of Moshe in that last set of 40 days of Chassidus Applied, going through the month of Elul, the month of Tishrei, and hence 60 days. So we've published a book on this, and we also now send out a daily email starting from the Chassidus Applied, so you can subscribe and sign up to that. It's a very concise, short thought for each day. And then, of course, an exercise that can help us go and travel through this journey called Elul. In addition, this book has also events that happen each day and customs and interesting facts. So if you haven't heard or familiar with this, check it out, 60 Days, a spiritual guide to the high holidays, which is one of the ways to help make it easier as a workbook to work through and journey through these 60 days. And thank God, people have responded very well. This really is a very effective tool and brings it to life, and in the spirit of Chassidus, applying Chassidus to our personal lives in a very relevant and actionable fashion. I also want to reference you to previous episodes where I spoke about Mevarchim, episodes 30, 79, and 129. These are all part of the archives, our library of archives of MyLife previous episodes, which you can access easily at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. This is also an opportunity where you can also find the forum to submit any questions, comments, thoughts completely anonymously. Now let us go to some specific questions as our custom here in this ongoing MyLife journey. And we'll begin with a question about the Rebbe. How is a Rebbe a Nasi Hador if majority of Jews don't recognize that? And this too will cross-reference you to episode 112 where I spoke about some of these ideas. So here's the question. The concept of a singular Nasi for the generation. Nasi Hador, the leader of the generation, like the Moshe of each generation. So here's what the writer asks. Hi. First of all, many thanks for the wonderful work you're doing with MyLife. I think it's filling an essential space in the community's needs. My question is about the idea of a Nasi. In Lubavitch, we're taught that the Rebbe is Nasi Hador, it's the leader of the generation, of our generation, and that this is something that applies for precious. Not clear what this means here, but I'll just rephrase it. Something that applies for the Rabbeim in each generation, equally for all Jews in that generation. I fully accept the Rabbeim as leaders of their Chassidim, as well as those that they have influence on. Even more so for our Rebbe, who influenced and continues to influence Jews across the spectrum of Klal Yisrael. And this influence can even be said to extend to non-Jews through the Noahide campaigns, etc. However, I have difficulty seeing this for Jews and Jewish communities who seemingly haven't had a connection to the Rebbe, or even were opposed to him. Particularly in previous generations, how was the Alter Rebbe the Nasi, for example, of a Taimani Jew who might not even have heard of him? I know we say that tzaddikim of a generation give chayes to Jews, including those who oppose them and the Torah, but I'm not sure why it's necessary to say this concept has to mean that one singular figure in a generation has to absolutely be the source of chayes for every single Jew in that generation. Thanks for taking my question. I hope I haven't rambled, and I look forward to gaining clarification on this, including parts of the idea that I may be misunderstanding. I'd like to be comfortable responding to someone who asked me about this idea of one Nasi Hador, who is an neshama klolis, a general soul, so to speak, an all-encompassing soul for everyone equally. Okay, thank you for your question. As I said again, in episode 112 I spoke about it, I believe other episodes as well, the concept of a Rebbe. So the first place, of course, to look is chapter 2 in Tanya. It's all spelled out there, where he speaks about the neshamas, and the neshamas, Reish B'nai Yisrael, the Nesim of every generation, and addresses this very particular point about the source of chayes is just like the moyach shebereish, which is the mind, is the central nervous system that governs and controls all faculties. So too, there's a moyach and a nefesh of a so-called soul that governs and is the central nervous system of the entire generation. People who know him, don't know him, and even those that oppose, he speaks about that very specifically. Just like the body had many different parts, and they all are driven by, in a healthy body, by this one central nervous system. Think of it like the engine room. So the question is, why do you have to say that, and what does it mean? So let's make a few key points that we have to make here. Though the mind is the central nervous system, there's still many components and many elements in the human organism, and each one has their specifics that govern that particular area. It's not just the mind is the overall so-called captain of the ship, but there are many different sections, and each one has its so-called leadership, which is why you find that Moshe Rabbeinu was talking the Nasi of the entire generation. Sheshes Liboyish is Asher Neche B'Kirbe, which means he encompassed and sustained Reya Neman. He was the faithful shepherd that sustained spiritually and physically all the Hamshachas went through him. But then there was a Nasi. There was in each of each tribe. It's not a contradiction, because since each tribe has a particular function, for example, Yisachar were the scholars, Zvulun were the business people, and each tribe has its general mission. So you need to have so-called, like Sari Alofim, Sari Meyes. You need to have delegated leaders that focus on that particular type of avodah. That's why you have in the candelabra, the Menorah, 7 branches of the Menorah. Even though there's one sinner that gives all of them the Ner Hamarovi or the central Ner flame, but they have to break down because people are diverse. So think of it like branches of a tree. Even though there's one tree trunk, and there's one main branch, you can say, for everything branches from, but then there are branches that branch from branches as well. So you have central branches, and they all connect back to the original tree trunk. So like he explains in the Gedus HaKedesh about Adam Adishon, everything began with Adam Achava, only one human being. All people on earth originated with one person. One couple, you can say, one man and woman. But then family structures were built. Nations evolved. And yet you could all trace it back to that one place. So it's not a contradiction. The one Nasi, or that one central nervous system, is necessary because you need to have a cohesive whole. If the human body was run by each department head, so to speak, the heart, the liver, the other organs, and you wouldn't have one unifying thing, you wouldn't have a cohesive, God forbid, you'd have chaos. You may have different functions, but you wouldn't have that unity. So unity, which is of course the key, Hashem Echad, is saying that there's one thing that unites it all, and then every diverse group has its leader that represents that group. No contradiction at all. And this has nothing to do whether part of the body knows that it's coming from that. Does the edge of your pinky, your toe, your small toe, the nail in your small toe aware of the mind? It may be, it may not be. We don't even know what it's aware of. And you could also say Malach HaMovesh Adam is the soul, is the Ekev Shabaregel. And Malach HaMovesh means it's like the king, because it's so numb and doesn't have sensation. Is it aware of the mind? May not be. But that doesn't change the fact that there's one central nervous system. Just like one edge of a branch of a very large tree, is it aware of everything of the tree trunk and the main branches beneath it? It may or may not be. That's not the point. The point is that the sustenance of that tree comes from the tree trunk, from the roots, and through the tree trunk to the rest of the tree, whether it's aware or not aware. And the reason for that is, I said, the unity. So we want to have the unity, but we also want a diversity, which explains why when the Rebbe was asked, for example, when they established yeshivas after World War II, the early 40s and early 50s, in Morocco, Chabad yeshivas, the Rebbe was asked, should we have these the Moroccan Jewish children assume Chabad customs? And the Rebbe said no. Their dress and other things that were part of their minhagim is not a nado pashta. Every river spreads out, even though all the rivers originate from the Shad HaKelel. And I'm referring to now when they walked through the parting of the sea. Every tribe, b'misilase yale, had its path. And yet there was a Shad HaKelel, there is a gate that encompasses everyone. So we need to respect both. The Shad HaKelel is the general principles, but then it has to manifest in each community, has its customs, its garments, its language, which is all part of the beauty, the harmony within diversity. So the harmony is the Nasi provides that harmony, but the diversity is also necessary. which is why you have community leaders and you have tribal leaders and community leaders and even family leaders, and you have both elements, like we know with the Korban Pesach. On one hand, it's a Korban Yachid, but on the other, it's like a Korban Sipur. Because on one hand, everybody brought it, but on the other, it was brought b'knufi, every group, every family, and the head of the family. So it's not a contradiction, and it explains also whether it's not about our awareness of it. This isn't about a popularity contest. We're not talking about, do you like the Rebbe, the leader of the generation, or you don't like him. He is God's chosen person to bring the sustenance, and that's why when the Jews cried for basar, Pasha Ba'alescha, they said, well, they didn't want man anymore. They were sick of it. They said, we want to have meat. So Moshe cried to Hashem, Ma'ayin li basar. Where do I have meat from? And Hashem didn't say, you're right, you're only their spiritual leader. Hashem said, I'll show you how. Vatzalti min haruach. He took from Moshe and imparted from his spirit to the Skenim. So it came from Moshe because that's how Hashem wants, God wants, that the transmission of every generation, its blessings, spiritually and materially, should go through this central nervous system. One of the reasons I explained, because it creates the unity. It would be like everything comes from the central nervous system of the mind, so it creates a unity. And then there's absolutely room for diversity. Now that you have the cohesiveness, you have the unifying, integrated force that connects, that itself allows for the diversity, each function, each organ to do its particular function. So this again is not a popularity. Just like we say about Mashiach, it'll be a Mashiach for the entire world. The world has different groups and different nations, and among the Jews themselves, different tribes and different tribal leaders. That's the specifics. But there's still one encompassing, one Kohen Gadol, one Torah, one God. And then that oneness manifests in the different diversity of each particular set of customs and set of traditions, and the diversity that fits to each particular group and ultimately to each particular individual. Next question. Conflicts and boundaries between communities and rabbis. How does the Rebbe address conflicts that arise between communities and rabbis? Unfortunately, it's a real issue. Purim Mem Zayin, close to the end of Fabrengen, after the Rebbe speaks strongly about Mashiach, he spoke very much how the completely strange and bizarre thing that there's machlekes more than ever before. And so here's a good opportunity to address it, especially as we approach the month of Elul, a month of Anila Dei V'Dei Dili, a month of love, a month when we try to deal with the challenges of the divisiveness. So there's a very fascinating answer I want to share with you. And again, this is an answer that I'm happy to share if anybody wants to see the actual Ksav Yad. And I can show it to you. I don't know if you'll see it on the screen here, but here's the Rebbe's handwriting, a nice long settle note from the Rebbe. And this was an answer from the Rebbe to a rabbi who was a long-term rabbi in a community. He was a rabbi there for a long time, and then some of the people in his community began to mix into running the community. They established a separate minyan because they were not happy with the rabbi, and they began to instigate a machlekes, a battle against him. To the point they finally told the rabbi that he can't do anything without getting permission from the balabatim, from the skonim, from the I guess the publics, the business people of the community. And this is the Rebbe's answer. I'm going to read it and translate it. Kiyum v'anhogas b'nei Yisrael b'chol zman b'chol mokim. I'll just translate the Chatchila, a loose translation. The preservation or the sustenance and the behavior of Eden at every time and every place is based on and is run by what it says in the Torah's Chaim v'Torah's Emes, the Torah of life and the Torah of truth. Shal avicha v'yagecha, ask your father and he will tell you. Zkenecha v'yemru loch, your grandfather and he will relate to you. These are the customs of Israel, minhag Yisrael sheteirem, that are Torah. And in our case, Benin Nadan Rav, Musmach means someone who is ordained, Mepirav Musmach, Ad Moshe Rabbeinu, because Smicha has to be Ish Mepi Ish. Smicha means literally putting your hands on, but ordaining a rabbi, by a previous rabbi, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, in an unbroken chain. Hu HaMoreh Da'asra. Moreh Da'asra means the boss, so to speak. Moreh is like the balabayas. the one that decides the asr of the city, the kilase of this community. With the power of Teira, Teiras Hashem, God's Teira. Kivin shein de'esein shavis, since different people have different opinions, that's the way the nature of human beings. And Teira says, everyone has the ability to ask, Mehechen Dantuni, where did you rule? Where did you get, what's the source of your ruling? So if the Rav rules something, he's talking the final say. But because people have different opinions and people have the right to question where the basis of a particular ruling, beginning from Moshe Rabbeinu, Hoyadayin Yochid, there was one judge, Chochem Rav, a wise person, a rabbi. The Ma'il Mizeh, higher than that, was a Bezdin Shel Gimel, a court of a law of 3, or Shel 23, meaning there were different stages of authority. Kol Elu Shel Rabbonim Musmachim, Moras de Teira, all of them are Rabbonim Musmachim, are rabbis that are ordained. Moras de Teira, they are by Teira, they have the authority. We're not talking about they want power and someone's giving them power. The Teira gives them this power. And to them, in this case, you should bring everything that's a difficulty, and the Teira will find an answer in a pleasant and peaceful way. But God forbid, to incite battle. God forbid the balabatim. Balabatim means the translate balabatim. The community members should judge themselves. In other words, without having an objective party, a Teira party. And definitely not to act, but rather to bring everything la'agudas rabbonim, to the group community of rabbis. Shalom al Yisrael, and there should be peace in Israel. This is the Rebbe's answer. And I know some people may argue, 1 second, what happens if I don't trust the Rabbanim? Okay, so that's another question. It's not related to this thing. Rabbanim have that ability, and you're always able to go to a Rav, and you could always ask another Rav, but not in any way to create, this is the Teira way. You have to have some authority. Now, we talked at other times, what about Rabbanim that people think are corrupt and so on. So the Rebbe obviously is talking about Rabbanim that are legitimate Rabbanim, and there's always recourse. But I wanted to just read it the way in its purity, without the filtering, the Rebbe's answer about this issue, and everyone should read it should take it as they see fit. Hopefully, for some people, as Ruach HaPrat, this can be something that's valuable in applying to our lives. Let us move now to another question. This is about the issue of the language called Yiddish. Is Yiddish a lost language? Hello, Rabbi Jacobson. I thought I'd provide you a laughing out loud, LOL moment with my broken Yiddish, which I have not written since my 1 year of college Yiddish at Queen's College in 1973. He's referring to an opening line that he wrote in this communication to us about what is the future of Yiddish. On one hand, it's a language that was used by the Rabbeim, is used to teach Torah. On the other hand, so many Jews simply don't relate to Yiddish anymore. So he wrote something in Yiddish. Okay, I think you'll be able to decipher my thoughts even with my many likely mistakes. I don't think the question has come up on Chassidus Applied. I remember back at college watching he's referring to something he watched in the original Yiddish version. Not sure what it is. Crying my heart out at a deep, soulful place in a way I could not do seeing the play live or in the movies. Referring to some play. In Hebrew and in English. A language captures the essence of a people. While Hebrew is our holy language, we have our Aramaic moment in time, our Ladino moment, and our Yiddish moment. What happens to Yiddish? What might we lose of Yiddishkeit without Yiddish? Another person writes, why learn Yiddish? Not sure how to submit as myself, but I don't care if this is anonymous or not. Years ago, I saved a lady's life with my poor Yiddish. I wish it was better. The story. I was a pre-med, part of a team at Jacobi Hospital. One day, we had a 91-year-old woman brought in. She had been hit by a car, but was fully conscious. She had vital signs, which is a certain type of bruising behind her ears, etc. Normally, this is not compatible with life. She, however, seemed to be fine. Because of the battle sign, they could not send her home and rather sent her to the neuro ICU for observation. When we went to talk to her, she didn't speak English, only Russian. Her daughter and son-in-law confirmed this. I don't know what made me do it, but I asked her 5 times, do you speak English? No. Do you speak any other language? No. Only Russian? Yes. Only Russian? Yes. But now I sound like a complete nut, I'm sure. Not even Yiddish? Yeah. So we now have established that I can communicate with her. Fast forward to a week later when she had been observed for a week in the ICU and was ready for discharge. The question was, where should she go? She had been living independently up until the accident. Now, should she be discharged to her daughter or to a nursing home? The team, with the family, of course, decided she would be discharged to her daughter's house. But she started trying to get out of bed. The bars were up for her safety. The nurses made the bed higher. She was still trying to get out. This went on for a while. They decided she was obviously a danger to herself and would not have to go to the nursing home. As I'm sure you can imagine, a nursing home in the Bronx in those years meant she'd be dead inside of a month, and most likely from neglect and restriction to her bed or at best a wheelchair. Baruch Hashem, they decided to call me. I asked her, please remember my Yiddish was from what my parents spoke to me for the first years of my life. Why are you crawling out of your bed? I said to her in Yiddish. She answered, Ich darf gehen in toilet. This poor woman was in a ward and didn't want to smell up the room. For this reason, which was not at all that she was incompetent, but rather she was competent and aware enough to be embarrassed to use the bedpan. She held it in all week and was almost sent to a nursing home. Thank God my parents spoke to me in Yiddish. And I spoke to my siblings in Yiddish and retained enough to save this woman's life. Obviously, this was directly from Hashem, as I've never before or after asked someone about their language 5 times. Okay, so let's talk a bit about Yiddish. So first of all, being that someone that has grew up with Yiddish as my first language, obviously it's close to my heart. But we learn, especially by Chassidim, what the Alter Rebbe writes in the Geras HaKedesh, that the Baal Shem Tov spoke in Yiddish. He actually writes it in order to explain one of the questions that the skeptics were asking about the Shekhinah manifesting, and they used the word mislabeshes. He says mislabeshes was not the language that Baal Shem Tov used because he spoke in Yiddish. And mislabeshes is not the actual accurate translation. The Rebbe uses this to describe how Yiddish is a very particular language. In Lekutei Sichos Chelik Chof Aleph, the year Mishpotim Toshem Amalef, when the Rebbe would speak often about learning Tanya on the radio, and Tanya was learned in Yiddish, the Rebbe has a fascinating sikh about the power of the language of Yiddish. On one hand, Lashon Kodesh obviously is the holy tongue, and the Torah is in Lashon Kodesh, and the world was created in that tongue. But because Yiddish became by Minig Yisrael a language, that millions and millions of Jews started learning Torah in that language, speaking mundane matters in that language, so it assumed a certain kedusha. Look in that sichim in the Sofis of Lekutei Sichos, volume 21, Mishpatim, a very powerful sikh Yiddish among others. Now, on the other hand, we find that today many people in Yiddish is not their language. Even if they may understand it, it's not their first language. They may not fully be able to speak it. And the Rebbe makes it clear when yeshivas ask the Rebbe should we insist on teaching Yiddish, the Rebbe says, why make it double difficult? It's hard enough for students to be challenged in learning. You don't have to make it also difficult to be challenged by the language. So clearly, with all its power, you have to be practical. But on the other hand, Yiddish is the Rebbe's language. You want to understand the Rebbe in his original, you have to understand Yiddish. So my response to all of this is the following. Yiddish it's sad that it's lost by so many. It's sad that it has become a rarer reality because it expresses so much of the rich culture and the rich life, and of course the way expressions were made by the Rabbeim, by Jewish mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers and so on. And even in my Chassidus that are written in Hebrew very often, except there are those in Yiddish, it comes certain expressions, the Rabbeim is writing in the parentheses in Yiddish because there's something about Yiddish, there's certain words that can only really be expressed in that language. So to make it kuva that a person should not learn unless they're learning Yiddish, it's case by case. Some families, parents don't speak Yiddish. The other friends don't speak Yiddish, so we can't make that as being a deal breaker. On the other hand, we must not also neglect the power of Yiddish and its rich history, and do whatever we can to convey that to our children, everyone in their possible way. I don't know if there's rules about it, but clearly it's something that we should be looking at. So is it a lost language? In some ways it's lost, but there are those that still speak it. And it's many of the Sikhs, and as I said, the Rabbeim spoke in this language. So at the end of the day, it has that power, and therefore that will never go away. Kedusha le'zazim imkema. Holiness never moves, it doesn't move, it remains, it's eternal. And indeed, it would be something worthwhile for people to appreciate, at least to some extent, the appreciation of the language. And we're not talking about the language just as an end in itself, but the language as a keli, as a container for the conveying of the feelings, of the cries, of the joys, of the richness of Jewish life that the Yiddish so beautifully captures. And as I said, that sikha really drives that point home. Yes. Okay. Let us move to now another question. Next question is, the Rebbe Rashab and modern astronomy. Hello, Rabbi Jacobson. I'm on chapter 9 of your Ayin Beis videos. Fascinating stuff indeed. Let me just mention and explain what that is. I, thank God, give a shir now going since Ayin Beis was 100 years in Tafshin Ayin Beis. We're now in Tafshin Ayin Beis. So 6 years ago, began a daily shir, a daily class, in learning Ayin Beis, which is the magnum opus of Chassidus, the Rebbe Rashab, over 144 Maimarim, and then there's a whole section, a whole volume that was not said and only written. So these Ayin Beis classes are recorded and are up on our YouTube channel, special channels on Ayin Beis. There are quite a few people who study them in order. We are now already in the middle of volume 2, approximately page 907, and most of the, I would say, the first 140, 150 chapters are up online, and we have to post and upload the rest of them. So that's what this fellow is referring to. Question: what did the Rebbe Rashab know of modern scientific astronomy to the extent known in his time? My view is that regardless of whether or not the Rebbe Rashab had a good understanding of astronomy, does not negate the value of this fascinating effort to comprehend the nature of existence from a spiritual perspective, to help define that roadmap between the finite and the infinite, between the material and pure energy. When the Rebbe Rashab speaks of the Kav, and frankly all other matters that fall under the theory of the Tzimtzum, does he understand it solely as an earth-centric theory? Is this a Kav that leads in all directions, pointed Kavim throughout the universe, that cut through pure energy, to formulate planets and perhaps even extraterrestrial life? Did the Rambam believe that there could be life on other planets? Did the Rambam or the Rabbeim, maybe the Rabbeim. If the entire theory is limited to the origin of a material earth and the interfaces between it and the eternal, that is still pretty awesome. But how could it be that this kav of existence is solely earthbound? It seems to me that the intersection of these Kabbalistic teachings and the Big Bang necessitates the position that spiritual energy was spiraling throughout the universe together with the Big Bang. Best regards. Okay. So there's a different bunch of little points here. Let's just begin and make a broader question. The Rabbeim definitely speak about scientific matters, whether it's astronomy, whether it's matters of mathematics, whether it's other scientific parts. They speak medical things, definitely psychological in the context of the unconscious or the superconscious. And the question that is being asked here, how much do they actually know of the sciences as it's studied in the schools of the time? So interestingly, I bring the story in Torah Meaning for Life. I believe it's in the chapter on science and technology. And I heard it firsthand from a fellow, together with another person who established, like there's the Hillel houses in each on campuses. There was another thing called Yavna House. I don't know if it still exists, but it did exist in the early 60s. The two students that founded it were by the Rebbe in Yiddish. One of them later became Mashgiach in YU. And he told the story the following. He says, they were in Chassidus, and the Rebbe asked them thoroughly, but he wanted to know the situation on every campus. Jewish observance, how many Jewish students there are, what is being done for them in the Jewish regard. After grilling them and asking all the questions, the Rebbe said, since I asked you so many questions, maybe you have a question to me. So he said, he asked the following question. He hears that the Rebbe is not just proficient in Torah, and all parts of Torah, but also in all sciences. And he's wondering, to acquire knowledge requires time and effort. It's not a miracle. Where did the Rebbe find the time to keep abreast and up to date, not just in Torah, but also in all these lahavdil sciences? So the Rebbe smiled in his usual way and said, I'm not responsible for what other people say about me, but since you asked me the question, I've had the same question about others before us that were said to be proficient in not just in Torah wisdom, but also Chachmas Elul. I wonder, how is it possible? So the Rebbe said in acquiring knowledge, there are two ways. One way is through a matal amayla, piece by piece. You read, you study, you learn from teachers, and you piece together the puzzle, and you get a bigger picture. So the Rebbe said there's another way to acquire knowledge, mamayla lamata. Since God created the world, and the way he looked into the Torah, and the Torah is the blueprint with which he created the world. So there's kloli haseichel, there's the axioms and certain methodologies and rules and logic and intelligence that permeate and affect all wisdoms. And when you know that, you don't know necessarily all the details, but you know the mahalach, the kav, the central direction of a logical argument. So there, you're not acquiring it from the details and moving upward. You're going from the top down of getting the big picture. It's like seeing it from the big picture, and then finding how it applies in each particular case. So the Rebbe says, so the way it's done by people like that is they don't have the time to read every detail, but they know the general picture, how it is, and the consistency between one school of thought and another, and therefore from that, they can then extrapolate to the details. It's a very fascinating answer, and I would say the same thing here. To say that the Rabbeim, well, we know that some of the Rabbeim, including the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, Marash, studied engineering, some studied mathematics, studied astronomy, healthiest Chassidus. But what level of amount they studied and how much they knew, and the Das Tachten level, meaning technically, it could very well be what they studied. For many things that they didn't study, they derived in that pattern and that approach of understanding the methodology, and therefore using that methodology, then it's a matter of filling in the details. But you have the gang, you have the derech, the mahalach, the approach that's necessary. So that's how I would explain this as well. As far as the kav and the tzimtzum and all that, applying it physically, there's no question that these are spiritual archetypal concepts. But at the same time, those archetypes define even the physical creation of the world and how it came into being. So there's no problem to apply tzimtzum, kav, reshima, and other things like that, to apply it to actually chemical structures or biological structures or other things that come to be life forms as they are born. So for example, when you talk about the gestation of a child in a mother's womb for 9 months, and then the birth of the child and all the processes, you could find parallels how that birthing happens on spiritual levels, whether it's from meichin to midas, from intellect to emotions, or different levels. So bottom line is, there's no question that Torah's, the cosmology of Chassidus, the spiritual cosmology can be applied to physical cosmology, but with many qualifications. It doesn't mean it's exactly that. It means there are parallels, there are similarities. Because at the end of the day, those rules govern nature, govern existence, from a spiritual level and ultimately also the physical level. So why not say that, for example, the body and the way it functions is commensurate to the way the spiritual realms function and their order. So there's moichin and midas, lamaila, intellect and emotions, however you explain that, and that evolves, nishtal shemahem evolves into the moichin midas in us. So there's no question that you can apply that, but you have to do it with qualification, not be megashim. We can't. I say megashim, taking ethereal ideas and so-called turning them into coarse understanding. They have to remain sublime and subtle and understand each thing case by case, and obviously done with experts, you can maintain the integrity of these ideas while you apply them in different circumstances. So it'd be fascinating to be able to see how different sciences and the parallels they have to Chassidus and Primus HaTorah, and there's no question as Mashiach comes, that's exactly what we'll do, because at the end of the day, the way it plays itself out in the wisdoms of the world evolves from the wisdoms of Torah. So the theories and the concept and the methodologies, as I said, all originates from there and then manifests in the different sciences that we are familiar with. Okay, next question. How much should Jews integrate with the rest of the world? So here's the question. Are the Jewish people a self-contained entity, or are we part of the larger world? If we're the chosen people, does that make us detached and superior to the rest of the world? Chassidus teaches us that we should and need to have a relationship with the rest of the world. How much should we integrate and how much should we stay above? Now, I will amplify the question even further based on another question here that I'm not going to read the whole thing. The fact of the matter is that we are not just independent entities, we're part of a world and we're interdependent with that part of the world. The peace, that's why Mispal B'Shlem Mishal Malchus, we pray for the peace of our governments, our countries, our havens, because when they're at peace, we're at peace. So we are dependent on a world being in a better place, including the non-Jewish world. And when the non-Jewish world is in upheaval, it always will affect Jews, and often we're the first to be affected. So there's no question that there's an intertwining. We're not just some type of separate aliens, which of course leads us to the concept of the chosen people. Chosen people does not mean that you ignore or you look down condescending at others. Where does that say that? Chosen people, you're chosen for a particular purpose. People of the book who know the objective. It's like people who are more familiar with the architect's plan. But everybody's part of the picture, Jews, non-Jews, and of all people of all backgrounds. And there's no room for superiority or inferiority. This isn't a popularity contest. This is God's plan, and each of us fulfills that plan in our particular way. Especially today's day and age, you'll find many people who grew up in a secular environment. So for them, secularism and science and everything they learned there is their number one experience, and the Jewish and the Torah part is secondary. So what do we do with that? Do we just ignore that? So we know the approach is everything is L'Shem Shamayim, that if a person did study to be a doctor or a scientist or another academic, they can turn that into being a kardem lachter, meaning like an axe, a tool, an instrument that uses their wisdom to bring godliness into the world, to do it L'Shem Shamayim, to use these studies to grow, to help others grow. So the wisdoms become essentially a means. In that sense, a Jew's role in the universe is really a complex one. There are parts of times where we are definitely on our own, which means like Yom Kippur and Shul all day. There's Shabbos, there's meals, there's other mitzvahs we do, either privately or with our families and communities, each in their own way. But then there are clearly things that we also interact with the world, whether it's through business, whether it's through governmental influence and negotiations, whether it's the different parts of our life that we need to deal with in the physical, material world. Then the non-Jewish world and the secular, it comes very much into play because we work with that. And when you say make a dir b'tachtenim means in tachtenim, not just in your home, not just in the tachtenim within your sphere. Tachtenim she'en tacht l'matem mena, even so-called hostile places to the divine. This is all part of the mission of bringing light to the nations, bringing light to the world. And in that sense, we are integrated. So the answer to the question is a complicated one. It's like saying when Hillel says, if I won't be for myself, who will be for me? And if I'm for myself, what am I? So and it's the same breath he says both. Which one is it? The answer is both. There's an element where you have to take care of your uniqueness, your family, your community, your individuality. But then there's a component where we are part of the whole. Eves abrius and mekarven l'teira. So and what am I if only by myself? So think of it like a musical symphony. Every note is indispensable, necessary. And the whole musical composition will be compromised if you don't play your note. And everyone needs your note. And you need everyone else as well. And the more you are individual in doing what you have to do and you play your instrument, your voice, your song, the more you'll unite and integrate with others, and vice versa. That's the paradox. Think of the human body. Every part is its own unique thing, but it's all part of one larger whole, as we discussed earlier about the Nasi Hador. So the answer then is, it's a combination. There's additionally different people in different situations. Mordechai was thrust into the Shar HaMelech, to the gate of the king, and through that helped save the Jewish people. Other people's role is in a Beis Medrash or other places. So think of it, each of us has our role in fulfilling the mandate of making the world a home for God, depending who you are, what you do, and what fashion you do so. And then there's who we are as people, family members, community members, individual. And there's no saying one is more important than the other. It's something we have to prioritize, and sometimes we have to run by a Rav, a Mashpia, to help us make sure we're on track. Okay. So we have some follow-ups, then we'll do the Chassidus question, and then the essays. Two follow-ups. One is about proving God's existence. So I discussed that last week at length, that the Torah's approach, Chassidus' approach, is not to go and start proving it, even though there are proofs and there are Sfarim that talk about it, and even in Chassidus here and there you'll find expressions that talk about the things that indicate the existence of God, the existence of God's eternity, the nitzchiyus hanevroim, in a sense where you have that tzva shamayim kayom beish, tzva oretz kayom b'min. You see the consistency of the planetary systems moving, and the different things this brings. But it's never the foundation, saying, okay, do that, and that's how you begin what God is. The Torah does not begin with proving God, because the most important thing is experiential proof. And I want to elaborate a little more on that and a few other points. What does experiential proof mean? It's not about a debate. If God wanted to create an agnostic universe, allowing people to make mistakes, you're not going to suddenly reverse that. You have to be wise, like I said before, to choose the right path. So it's not about a proof, but experiential proof. When you see it works, when you see it resonates, when you see that family life, personal life thrives when you follow the Torah, that is a tremendous proof. It's more than proof, because you see its work. And I'm not talking about selfishly saying, what does it mean? What's in it for me? We see that it's a dynamic that makes life better. So then it convinces us, who could have given us such a manual? Only the operator's manual of the world. The operator's manual is the Creator Himself, God. So there's experiential proof, just like you'd say about music. How do you know music? Prove to me that music touches you. So it's not about getting sensors and studies and tests and so on. I feel it resonates with me. Resonating is a tremendous proof. Is it a proof, the mathematical proof? It may not be, but it's experiential, a life proof. In addition, I want to also make reference to a class I gave on this topic a while back. You can look it up on YouTube, and just the title of the class was Proof of God's Existence, where I go much more into detail on these themes, and something worthwhile watching. This is also every Wednesday night. I deal with topics of this nature. MyLife is answering questions, and more specifically in this context. But that Wednesday night class, and one of the classes, recent classes, was about the proof of God's existence. It's easily retrievable and found on our site. Then I also wanted to read a few excerpts of the letter I mentioned, the letter from Hei Shvat, Tov Shel Lamed Zayin. In reply to your letter, you will find enclosed a brochure on that subject matter. It is based on the Kuzri, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, which, though written centuries ago, is valid also today, and precisely from the viewpoint of empirical science. With reference to the question of proof of the existence of God, the medium of the letter and the pressure of time make it difficult to go into the complex matter here. However, I would make at least one observation regarding your basic premise, upon which your proof rests, namely in your words, if this process of making intelligent things continues after some time, there will be things which compared to us are gods, etc. On closer scrutiny, you will see that this does not necessarily follow. As for example, in regard to such divine attributes as the power of creation, ex nihilo, or that God cannot be affected, and many others. I would like to add a point which is essential in my opinion. I refer to the philosophical discussion on the question of how a person can prove scientifically that he exists, the person. Needless to say, for all practical purposes as well as for personal satisfaction, no individual requires proof of his existence, and one need not write a treatise to confirm one's profound conviction. You don't need proof. It's experiential, as I said. So one need not write a treatise to confirm one's profound conviction, both consciously and unconsciously, that one exists. The same is true about the existence of God. A normal person who is not prejudiced by personal motivations or rationalizations requires no proof of God's existence. The question can only arise for the sake of discussion or answering skeptics. However, debating the question is really pointless. The reason I consider the above point essential is that an approach based on proof of God's existence has an inherent weakness, and that all scientific, quote-unquote scientific, or so-called philosophical proofs are subject to the limitations of science and philosophy. Whereas amunah, the conviction of real faith, is by its very nature unshakable and pervasive, permeating one's whole being. In final analysis, since so-called scientific proofs of God's existence are debatable, we must take recourse in amunah, rooted in the historic truth of the revelation at Sinai preceded by the exodus from Egypt, when all Jews declared, "This is my God, and I will glorify Him," as has been transmitted to us in unbroken chain from generation to generation. A further important point, perhaps the most important, is that this. Although amunah, faith, is rooted in the mind and heart, intellect and emotion, our Torah called Torah's Chaim, the Torah of life, because it is a Jew's true guide in life. This Torah declares that the essential thing is the deed. That is to say, the daily life and conduct in accordance with God's will, as set forth in the Torah. This principle too could be explained and validated in various ways, hence also limited, but as above, surely no proof is needed, with blessing. Okay, if anybody wants to get this, please send us an email with your email address. I'm happy to send it. Another follow-up was about the ups and downs of life, which we also spoke about last week in navigating. Hi. What has happened with my inquiry about the topic of weathering the ups and downs of life, I wasn't talking about depression and joy. I'm looking at interpersonal relationships and how to cope with other people's highs and lows. And the ups and downs life throws at you, and how Rabbi Jacobson suggests we cope with those. I did get some inspiration from his reference to life is like a Ferris wheel, and put 2 pictures of a Ferris wheel in my dining room wall, which is helpful to me. But I find the whole topic fascinating and challenging. All the best. So the truth is, what I spoke about, yes, was about people's individuals' ups and downs as I understood the question, but the same applies with dealing with other people's ups and downs. So first of all, let's make something clear. Every person has his challenges in life. You don't have to necessarily be on someone else's merry-go-round, or I should say Ferris wheel, or roller coaster. If you have to be because you're a spouse, or because of a family member, or because of whatever reason, then you have to learn to navigate. And also learn that you are not completely bound by that person's journey. You have your journey, but you may have to adjust and be flexible and resilient in how you deal with someone else's journey. In addition, if it is your spouse or some other significant other in your life, it could also be that by your navigating properly, you can help them navigate properly. So everything I said applies as well to other people's ups and downs. With that, let us move now. Let me make sure I covered everything, my friends. One minute. Here we are. Okay. Chassidus Question. What is the meaning? Can you please explain the meaning and the application of meitzar hagaron? Okay, great. Meitzar hagaron in Hebrew is the narrow part of your throat. It's called meitzar hagaron. Garon is throat. Meitzar would be a narrow straight. And if you look at the throat, that's what it is. You have the head here. The throat is like a narrow channel. and then it goes into your torso, and chest, and body, the rest of your head. So what is the meitzar hagaron in Chassidus? So if you think about it, and now first let me begin with just the physical part of it, the physiology of it, you see it's like a channel. Air goes in through the lungs, through our mouths, food enters, and other things that enter into our bodies enter through there, and the meitzar hagaron is essentially the channeler that channels it into the rest of the body. So Chassidus looks exactly at meitzar hagaron as that, as a parsa, a partition. You could say a channel, you can say a divider, you can call it an interface between one dimension and another. And what is that dimension? It's the meichen and midas. The mind is here, the midas are here. And that narrow channel called meitzar hagaron, meitzar also like for the word Mitzrayim, is where the mind and the heart can be disconnected. You can understand something very well and not act on it. That's because the meitzar hagaron is a narrow channel that limits the flow, and therefore when it reaches the emotions of the heart, it doesn't have the full intensity that the mind has. So meitzar hagaron essentially in that sense is a distorter and limits the flow. But on the other hand, meitzar hagaron also creates a bridge that allows the intensity of the mind to be diminished, like through a parsa, through a partition, through a curtain, or through a shroud, or a shield, or a sheath, all legitimate translations, that allows that somewhat diminishes the intensity so it could enter a lower part of you. So then it's on one hand a concealer, but on the other hand an interface. Now this is discussed in a number of places. I'll begin with Torah Eir in Parshas, I think, Ve'er Emor, and decided in Ayin Beis. Since I'm teaching Ayin Beis, I could refer to Ayin Beis where it's at length discussed in Volume 2, essentially page 878 and on. And there he cites the beer of Lechen Emor in Torah Eir, and brings other sources as well, and explains that this element of the meitzar hagaron is one of three so-called membranes, or channels, or parsois, partitions in the human body. One is the membranes in the brain itself, in the mind. The other is this membrane, the meitzar hagaron, which is a membrane, a channeler, like a funnel, I would say, a channeler, a tunnel. And then there's the third one, is the diaphragm, which separates between the Evrei Neshima, the lungs, and the liver, and the stomach, I should say, the organs that the digestive system, the respiratory system from the digestive system. And he explains at length. You can look it up there, the three different. And then he goes on to say that there are more parsois from the conscious to the superconscious, and lower as well. But meitzar hagaron plays that role between meichen and midas. That's the key thing to remember. Now there's more on this topic as well. You can look it up in Sefer Lekutim of the Tzemach Tzedek and the Erech Goren, and there he cites sources and cross references to other places. So that's the gist of it. In our personal lives, one of the manifestations of this is that a person contemplates on something and contemplates and understands, and still when it comes to their feelings, they can't get it done. There's some cutoff, some dissonance. So the meitzar hagaron is reflective of that dissonance that we need to bridge. As well as, that he says, like the interface, meitzar hagaron is mumutza mechaber, and compares it, for example, to the pores on the skin, which create an interface. It's not just a closed circuit. It's not just a closed-ended system. There's pores. The reshes on the mizbeach, certain like grill or net that was on the mizbeach, also with holes in it, and other things that serve this type of very fascinating piece in Ayin Beis there about these interfaces where there is something flowing through, but in a diminished fashion. And ultimately, the parsa between Atzilus and Biyah is compared to the meitzar hagaron because it changes, it shifts, alters the flow. Because that's what a parsa does. It changes the muchus, the personality of the flow on the higher level, as it divides and separates and lets it filter through to the lower level. Okay. Let us now go over to the essays. We have 3 essays. Essay number 1, Get the Point, I should say, by Moshe Bachman, 25 years old, teacher, Lubavitch Yeshiva, Ocean Parkway. Sailing on the proverbial ship across the seas of life, one may often encounter stormy, treacherous waters that threaten to capsize his existence. Very poetic opening. As adults, these challenges are apparent and constant, for some even on a daily basis. With waves of responsibility at every moment, children, food, clothing, tuition, and mortgage payments, one's peace of mind can be so disturbed that he is distracted from the most important things in life. The family he is working to provide for, and his religious responsibilities that provide the blessing for success. These conditions, though, were already foretold in our Torah and in King Solomon's Song of Songs. We are assured that the mighty waters are not able to extinguish the love. Mayim rab lo yichelim l'chavis es ha'ava. And he goes on to explain what that means and how it does not allow the essential connection and love that we have to God. These distractions are not only not get in the way, don't get in the way, but we can learn to use them as a catalyst to make the love and connection even greater. And he goes into a discussion using the Mittler Rebbe's concept of Nekuda Kav Shetach, a point, a line, and an expansion and a plane, to understand how we can reach a state where we rise above and transcend these distractions, these mighty waters that can so overwhelm and inundate us. So this essay and other essays, new essays, are constantly being published at meaningfullife.com/MyLife in our archives. And you look at you can find the essays 2017, as well as the essays from 2016 and 2015. Also, if you subscribe to our weekly email, we send notices of all these new postings as they are posted. Second essay is the End of Envy by Alexander Zalom, 25 years old, teacher, Yeshiva Teferes Bachurim, Tem Chidmim, Morristown, and originates from Clarksville, Maryland. I continuously be taken by the fact that the age of these essayists, 25 years old, 24 years old, 22 years old, 18 years old. They're also older people, but the fact that we can get people from that age group to be inspired is itself a tremendous statement. Because so many people are distracted in different things. That's the goal. If we can get as many people in their 20s to be inspired by Chassidus, to write, come on, that is basically bringing the Geula. So this essay, as I said, the End of Envy, and here he talks about the idea of envy and loving your fellow as yourself. And Rabbi Kiva is saying this is a fundamental of Torah. And he begins, and to happen again, you had finally found your niche, that craft at which you were going to excel, that quality for which you will be known and remembered. You were going to be the best writer, swimmer, or chef, or perhaps the most successful, talented, or intelligent. Whatever it was going to make you special. And then someone else came along. The other guy wrote better, swam faster, and his cooking to die for. He was more successful, talented, and intelligent than you could ever be, and of course he didn't even try. Most of us feel a need to be outstanding in some way. Today, when low self-esteem is highly common, we are especially prone to envy the successes and virtues of others. For some, envy can be a source of constant stress, always feeling the need to catch up or stay on top. For others, envy can even spell existential angst. If I am not truly special, then why am I here? What am I worth? This essay sets out to explain that if we live with a Chassidic understanding of the Torah's commandment to love our fellow as we love ourselves, then our envy for one another will dissipate naturally. And goes on to explain the Chassidic meaning in love your fellow as yourself, and v'ahavta l'reacha kamecha, and explains it in using different sources from Chassidus, and then applying it to an insights that we have. That number one, we have 2 warring souls. 2, we have contemplation creates reality, extracting the ego, forgiving your fellow, diminishing the differences. These are methods and tools to be able to get to a place where you can channel yourself in a way that instead of envy creates unity. And finally, the third essay, What Makes Us Tick, by David Chaim Hoffman. David Chaim Hoffman, 52 years old, self-employed, Brooklyn, New York. New to the study of Chassidus, I am not so new to the study of human behavior, nor in particular the study of team organization or cultural performance. My earliest experience was working in the neuropsychology department at Rockefeller University in the early 1980s. I was an intern washing glassware, preparing samples, tending animals, etc. But I had the privilege of sitting in on meetings with research scientists, including Dr. Jay Weiss, Dr. Jonathan Cherry, and others. And what they were working on fascinated me. Whatever the specific field of research at the moment, these men and the teams that surrounded them were working on understanding the connection between physiology and psychology. Later I explored more deeply into behavioral development and organizational psychology, and then into performance, individual, athletic, and organization. I've spent almost 20 years training organizational leaders and teams to be effective. And goes on to say what he's learned from Chassidus, and Chassidus enhances, and not only enhances, takes it to another level, this study of human behavior. Compares it to Tanya and creates some parallels between the two. Now, I generally love these type of essays because they really bring two schools of thought together in ways that each one enriches the other and explains in the context of Chachma being a das. Well worth reading. And with that, we conclude the essays. Let me wish everybody, as is customary, ready from beginning of Tu B'Av, have a chesiva v'chesima teva, l'shana tev mesuke b'gashmis and beruchnius, and we should be blessed in every possible way. This has been MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 175. We are here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Please submit your questions. Please give us your comments. Please help us continue the work and let us all partner in this work of Yefutzu Meinasecha Chutza, to spreading, to distributing, to disseminating the Meinasecha, the wellsprings of Chassidus, Chutza, to the outskirts, to the farthest possible remote outskirts of this universe. Everyone have a very good Geben Shiyar, a good Geben Shechedesh Elul. Until next Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. This has been MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 175. Thank you very much.